everyone, and I wanted to come and talk to you guys for just a few minutes today about this whole deep state false flag business that people are already talking about in regard to the Las Vegas shooting. But I'm going to give you guys a couple of minutes to hop on because I have not talked to y'all in a minute. You all over at We Are the Media, our friends and family over there. Hey y'all, give you a couple of minutes to hop on because I really want to have a quick but as in-depth a conversation about this as I can, because this is a pretty serious issue. And it's not serious for the reasons I think people believe. And I want to be clear about what the terms mean that people are using. Okay, people are already talking about how the Las Vegas shooter is being used by the deep state, how this whole thing is a false flag. and I think sometimes people don't know what those terms mean. So right off the bat, let's explain what that terminology really means. The deep state refers to basically a shadow government, a bunch of people or an organization behind the government that pulls the strings of the government in secret and makes decisions using the government outside of democratic processes and, all that kind of stuff. It's this shadow cabal, that's making deals in back rooms with all of this, nefarious covert power that even the president and Congress has to answer to. And this term came from the shadow governments that did exist in countries like Soviet Russia before, the USSR before it was, what it is now. Our dog is being really jealous because we're not paying any attention to him, but we're paying attention to you right now. So just ignore him. He's our shadow government. Brewski is our deep state. And the kinds of shadow governments that existed in countries like Turkey. So shadow governments exist. They do exist. And I'm certainly not going to say that there is not a deep state-esque apparatus in the United States. I'm not going to go that far. What I am going to say is that the deep state in the United States doesn't exist the way it did in those countries, because those countries were dictatorial, autocratic countries where people honestly did not have any kind of say in what their government did. So yeah, there was this shadow panel of people that the people of those countries didn't select who actually ran the government, that those people knew nothing about. But in this country, it's not entirely true that we've never known about the people who actually make the decisions and use the power of the government against not just people in this country, but against people in other countries too. Here's a good example, what I think is a good example for you to understand why some people have a real problem with the whole deep state and false flag conspiracies, right? And for false flag, a false flag doesn't mean that something isn't necessarily true. What false flag means is that it's an event that is orchestrated by the so-called deep state to make people believe that one group of people or one person is responsible for the event, when in fact something else is going on behind the scenes. So that's what a false flag is. It's an event that was created by the deep state to cover something else up. All right, so why do some people have such a problem with this idea of the deep state and false flags, especially in mass shooter events like Las Vegas? Let me give you an example that I hope makes sense. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, when cocaine, especially crack cocaine, started to flood Los Angeles, and the Central and Southern California cities, Black people knew something wasn't right. Because, see, we're talking about a predominantly poor neighborhood. And many predominantly poor neighborhoods that crack cocaine started showing up in, I mean, it was in abundance. And the same thing was happening in a lot of Latino neighborhoods, but with powdered cocaine, but crack cocaine also. So there was all this money flying around, right? But there were all these drugs also flying around. And regular old everyday people in these neighborhoods, these Black and Latino neighborhoods, knew doggone well that people in their neighborhoods didn't have the kind of money required to import all these drugs. So what conclusion did they come to? Well, obviously the only people who have that much money to import that volume of drugs, and not just drugs, but guns also, because all of a sudden all of these guns, more guns than most people had ever had access to, started showing up on the streets of LA and Oakland and Compton and you know, and Hispanic neighborhoods too. And of course we know that the whole epidemic spread throughout the country, especially in the large urban cities on the coasts. So the only people who had the kind of money to import that volume of drugs and that volume of guns was the government. Everybody knew that. And I have to admit, I got to admit, because I was in high school when crack happened. I always say that. When the crack epidemic happened, I was in high school. And when I started to hear from older Black people, the CIA did this, the CIA is behind this, the CIA imported drugs into our communities, the CIA, the government. When I started hearing people say that, I honestly thought they were nuts. I really did. I thought they were crazy. But after a couple of years, even I couldn't deny that Black people just didn't have the kind of money required to traffic that much drugs. We didn't have the money to bring that stuff into the country. Yeah, there was you know, we would kingpins, so they called them. They weren't really kingpins. They were just regional drug. They were just leaders of the regional drug fiefdoms. That was it. But they weren't the real kingpins. Not the freeway Ricky Rosses. They were the middlemen. The actual kingpins were the people who were working with the CIA to help them import the drugs from planes and ships. And why was the government involved in this? Why was the CIA doing this? Well, because the money from the drugs went to fund the Contras, which were I'm trying to remember this and get this straight. This was during the Reagan administration. Reagan didn't like who was it, Noriega, who was the president or leader of Panama. And my husband's in the background giving me notes because he's the one who can remember all these details. And I just can't keep them straight in my head because there's so much stuff in there. So Reagan wanted to depose the leader of that country. So he used the Contras to do it. And he used the money from the drug sales to fund the Contras. Ronald Reagan and the CIA did that. It wasn't the first time the CIA had done that type of thing. Because Black people knew that this was an inside government job because they remember Vietnam. They remembered how our neighborhoods were flooded with heroin after Vietnam. And the only way all of that heroin could get into our communities, we're talking about a bunch of people who were poor when they went to Vietnam, and they were poor and broken physically and mentally when they came from Vietnam. How could they have the apparatus to import all of that heroin? They didn't, but the government did. So it's through that pattern of knowledge of how the government, what we like to call now the deep state, that's why I chuckle at it, because see, there's really nothing covert in what the government does anymore. It used to be covert because we didn't live in an age in which we were privy to all of this information, right? We didn't find out about the CIA's involvement in the Bay of Pigs until decades later when the documents were declassified and we could all go online and read them. Because by then, all the people who were involved had either retired or they're dead. We didn't know anything about COINTELPRO, which was the FBI's covert operation to discredit and infiltrate social and racial justice organizations in this country. We didn't know about that operation until some white kids who were anti-war protesters, anti-Vietnam War protesters, broke into a government building with the intent to burn draft cards. And they were going through the file cabinets, and they stumbled upon these files, these documents that were filed away in a file cabinet. Now listen, yes, COINTELPRO was a covert operation in that the FBI didn't tell anybody who was outside of the FBI about the operation. But if you're going to be a shadow government that operates in secret, what you don't do is write your plans down on paper and file them away like tax returns. So it's not necessarily, and this is my perspective, people can certainly disagree with me, and I'm about to look at your comments in a bit. People can certainly disagree with me, and I'm sure that many people will and do disagree with me. But I don't believe that it's so much that the United States government is a deep state or even has a deep state, because we all know who pulls the strings now. We might not have known before, because I think we lived in an age that was a pretty long time where we believed everything our government told us. Most people, I don't think most Black people in this country, most Native people in this country, and most Hispanics ever believed everything this government said, because we've seen our government do too much to our communities for us to trust them. So really, it was most of white America that trusted and believed what the government said. But we're not in that age anymore where we automatically believe what the government says, because we have access to all of this information now. And let me just note that the reason the government declassifies documents like information about the Bay of Pigs is because us knowing about it now is absolutely no threat to them. They literally don't care. Why do they not care? Because the damage has been done. I understand that a lot of people believe that the government, one of the purposes of the deep state is to disarm Americans. Because, people believe that if we're all armed, we're a threat to the government. Our military is the most powerful military on the planet. The entire planet. To the tune of 700 billion new dollars powerful. Even after having lost, and I mean like you lose your keys, lost $10 trillion almost $10 trillion over the past 10 years. And our government still gave the Department of Defense $700 billion. We are no threat. If every man, woman, and child in this country were armed, we would still be no threat to a military that powerful. We would not be. And I know that that's kind of difficult for people to get their head around, but when you think of the American military, think of all of the firepower. Don't think of the people. Don't think of the people. Think of the artillery. Think of the weaponry that is at the disposal of the people who make the decisions. You and I, with a handgun, a long gun, and an automatic weapon, no threat to our military whatsoever. So I don't believe that there is that the deep state, the government, the CIA, the FBI has a vested interest in disarming Americans. You know why? Because I see what they did out in the open in Standing Rock. They couldn't care less whether everyone at Standing Rock had weapons or not. They showed up armed to the teeth just in case they were. All of their weaponry wasn't to show their power and their might. No, all of their weaponry was really to use it if they had to. That's not there for intimidation. Please don't think that our local law enforcement has any qualms about using military weaponry against American citizens. Black people know they don't have a problem doing that because they do it to us all of the time throughout history. The reason California was no longer an open carry state was because Black people exercised their Second Amendment rights to open carry. That wasn't a deep state decision. There was no back room, let's do this in secret, let's figure out how we... No, Governor Ronald Reagan from the State House just flat out changed the law. Our government doesn't have to do anything in secret in order to violate our rights and subvert our alleged freedom, which we don't really have. Someone always brings up the Patriot Act when I have this conversation about the deep state, and they say, well, the Patriot Act began to curtail Americans' freedoms. Do you understand that by the time the Patriot Act was passed, people in this country had already been subjected to wiretaps and surveillance by the government? And it goes farther back than COINTELPRO, actually. We're talking about the House Un-American Affairs Committee during the McCarthy era. They were spying on people then. They meaning our government. And I'm not even talking about the deep state, because you had actors who were making movies saying they were doing these things on behalf of our government. Have there always been people behind closed doors funding these things? Sure, absolutely. But the idea that there is a secret government behind the government, no, it's the government. It is our government. If you go back and read, and we've shared this article so many times during the election, it ought to be required reading for everyone who's ever interested in politics for any reason. You need to go back and read an interview that Bernie Sanders did with Rolling Stone magazine in 86 or 96? I think it was 96. And it's called The Horror Show That Is Congress. I think that's the name of the article. Bernie Sanders talks about how legislation is actually passed. It's not all done with the debates on the floor and the vote. No, they're backdoor deals that everybody knows are done. That's what lobbying is. You've got people who are representatives of the Farm Bureau who take a bag of money and they bring it down to Washington, and they have a lunch meeting with the representative from their state. And they say the members of the Farm Bureau would not like this law to be passed because this would be hurtful to the farmers. And we'd like more subsidies. And we'd like the government to subsidize more of these crops. And here's your money so you can pass that legislation. That's not done in secret. That's the way it's done out in the open. Is it true that there are people who are making volcano craters full of money off of the violation of the rights of American citizens? Absolutely. Please watch the documentary 13th to understand why mass incarceration was ramped up the way it was during the Clinton administration. It was partially because of the Clintons' deeply seated racist views. It was partially because they wanted to win back the votes of conservative white males, but mostly it was for money. And it was money from the prison lobby. And the reason it is so difficult to make inroads to reverse mass incarceration and get justice in the prison industrial complex is because of money. And a little organization called ALEC, ALEC. That's not a shadow government. It's in a documentary, a very popular documentary that's public. Okay, so what does all this have to do with Las Vegas? I'm not at all saying that our government does not do things that we don't know about, that they're not going to admit to, that they lie about all the time, because of course they do. Yes, they do. But the idea that Las Vegas is a false flag operation, that the CIA staged or had a hand in orchestrating the massacre in Las Vegas to make us think that it was this one guy or two guys or 10 guys or whoever he got help from to do this, because I do believe he had help. But just because he had help, it doesn't mean that his assistant was the CIA. But the idea that the CIA orchestrated this to make us think that it was this one guy, but it was really something else and about something else, I have a hard time buying that idea, because whenever the CIA gets involved or the FBI gets involved in subverting movements or tampering with citizens and their right to move and exist and be, there's always a very clear reason for doing it. Always. Our government doesn't wiretap people's phones if they're not trying to either catch someone doing something or trying to frame someone for doing something. They're always looking for information. They're always looking for a person. The FBI went after the Black Panther Party and the American Indian movement and the Weathermen because they did not want poor Black, white, Native, Asian, LGBTQIA and Black people to get together to push the government toward real equality and justice. It really was that simple, because we were that close. So I have to look at this situation in Las Vegas and I have to ask myself, what's the reason for the FBI to get involved in this? What's the reason for the CIA to get involved in this? I don't purport to know the mind of everyone in the CIA, but I can't see the CIA or the FBI or anybody else being concerned about gun control in America. And that goes back to what I said earlier. If everyone has a gun, so what? The government has the military. And not only does the government have the military, the government also has law enforcement, state and local law enforcement that are armed by the military. So what? We have guns. And it's inconsequential compared to the government's firepower. And then some people say, well, something else is going on. I would buy that when people tell me what the something else is, because I can't see the connection between anything the CIA wants or the FBI wants that had anything to do with a country music festival. Not disparaging country music, y'all. I'm just saying. I don't quite know what the government could have been after to disrupt a country music festival. People are saying, well, we don't have all the information. There are a lot of holes. It's been less than a week. And I think we've been spoiled into believing that we can have all of the details about every event right now. And social media has spoiled us with that, but we have to be really careful with that kind of thinking, because just because we don't know everything, it doesn't mean that we should know everything, because in instances like this, the police do keep some information back from the public. And number two, if you do know everything and it comes out to be inconsequential, then what? Then what happens to the deep state, CIA, false flag? Then it becomes just what it maybe is. an angry 64-year-old white man who, I don't know, maybe he finally realized that the American dream isn't real. He was an avid gambler. Maybe he had money problems. We don't know. But just because we don't know why he did what he did, it doesn't mean that it's a conspiracy. It's a deep state-backed conspiracy. That I don't buy. And I think it's dangerous when we do that. I think it's very dangerous when we do that because we jump to conclusions over a whole lot of other steps and we ignore other things that are very, very important. Like right now, people are focusing on this deep state conspiracy business that they think is going on in Las Vegas. But American citizens have been protesting the unjust acquittal of a police officer who killed an unarmed black man, another one in St. Louis, for 3 weeks now. 3 weeks. Those people have been in the streets for 3 weeks protesting, fighting the system the only way they feel like they have left. Because they live in a city that is almost literally under siege by the police department and has been for a long time. The government doesn't need to do that in secret. They're doing that to people out in public. Journalists are being arrested. Citizens are being maced. People in wheelchairs are being maced in St. Louis right now. While we're focusing on a deep state conspiracy in Las Vegas. Something else that it reminds me of, I just wrote an article for the Medium, for Medium. Lukman Nation is expanding, so we're expanding into print and doing some articles. We're using Medium and WordPress. And I wrote an article and I intentionally used a very provocative meme with a quote that is not true from George Soros as the thumbnail for the meme. And it was so interesting, the responses that people gave to not the article, because people couldn't even get past the meme to read the article. And I think this is what we miss when we don't stop and think about what's going on, what we see, the information we have, and take the time to make a critical assessment of it before we jump to a conclusion that seems popular at the time. We miss a lot of good information that we could be getting if we just slowed down a minute and started asking ourselves some questions before we jump to the conclusion that this is the deep state. Ask yourself, okay, so what does the deep state have to gain from staging this? What's the CIA have to gain from staging this? What does the FBI have to gain? And if the answer you come up with is something that is nebulous and isn't concrete and doesn't point to something that is happening right now, then that's a very tenuous connection, I think. And when we see memes, instead of doing the investigation into whether it's true, whether the person actually said it, whether the information in the meme is accurate, what do? We automatically share it. We have an instinctual, automatic reaction to things, and we go with that. That's what happened with the original George Soros meme. And that's what happened with the article I wrote about not just that meme, but the entire racial hypocrisy that's been going on in the progressive movement. Because you've got people who say they stand for justice, but they stand for justice for all, but they share a meme that is blatantly racist, along with being untrue. Why? Because they don't take the time, they don't stop, take the time, make a critical assessment of the information they have, do a little research. So, yes, I'm asking you to read our article in Medium. It's under Lukman Nation. We have 2 whole articles in there and some more are to come. And do stay tuned to Coffee Current Events and Politics in Lukman Nation as we bring you more content. Check us out over on Brick by Brick. We've got series on neoliberalism. We have series on the history of Standing Rock. I'm finishing up a series on the rise of the political black left. We've got a series over there on racism and why racism is a problem. And we'll be bringing you more content. We're preparing to do a series on Puerto Rico and neoliberalism and why what's going on there is important. These are things that we must pay attention to because they're happening to people right now. And our government isn't doing anything in secret anymore. There are not people in back rooms making shady deals, pulling the strings of the government. No, we know who those people are now. And they have amassed so much money, and they have fooled so many people. They've brainwashed so many people that they don't even need to stay in the shadows anymore. They're president now. They're the president of the United States now. So, are there still conspiracies? I'm sure there are. I'm sure there are plenty of secret things that our government is doing that we don't know about yet. Is the Las Vegas Massacre one of those things? In my opinion, I don't think so. It doesn't add up for me. Doesn't mean I'm right. That's just my opinion. So thanks for joining me tonight, you all. Check us out again on YouTube. Subscribe to Coffee, Current Events, and Politics and Lukeman Nation on YouTube and Brick by Brick on YouTube. Stay tuned to We Are the Media for all kinds of great content. Peace, y'all. Be really good to each other.